Welcome to Making IT Work, Deep Creek Center's blog for IT professionals committed to using best practices to provide exceptional value for their business clients.
Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. On today's program, we're going to continue our discussion of customer journeys, and in particular of the step of creating an offer for the customer. So you'll remember that in the customer journey, before we can get to the point where we can make a meaningful offer to a customer, we need to have gone through various exploration stages where the customer is looking for potential solutions and we are looking for potential customers, going through an engagement phase where we build trust and transparency with one another and ultimately get to the point where we can start having meaningful conversations about the customer's perceived needs and the service provider's perceived capabilities and how we might then work together to provide a potential solution. In the previous program, we talked about how you go about the process of assessing potential offering alternatives, looking at demand, looking at potential supply requirements, and how you might look at different potential packages of solutions. Now we're going to talk more explicitly about designing service offerings. And in order to do a good job of this, we want to be able, again, to put ourselves in the customer's shoes and think about this from a customer experience point of view. Now, one core way to go about this is to use good lean principles to do your thinking, to understand from the customer's perspective, what is the value proposition? What are the desired outcomes they're trying to achieve? What are the costs and risks they're trying to manage along the way? And then ultimately to be able to map the value stream associated with the various activities and information flows that have to take place in order for us to produce that value. From there, we want to be able to look at the sequence of activities, look at the information tracking, and to be able to assess things like how does the flow work? How and where might the flow be interrupted in various ways? Are there certain bottlenecks that potentially impact the ability of that workflow to proceed apace? From there, we want to be able to establish what we might call pull-based systems, where the demand is being pulled as people have capacity to carry out and deliver it, rather than being pushed downstream in various types of batches of work. And ultimately, by using pull-based systems, you get a much more effective use of your resources and the overall workflow improves. Lastly, of course, once you've established this pull-based approach, you want to be able to look holistically at the system, identify the weakest links to it, and then to be able to identify potential improvements that will enable you to drive improved value and improved efficiency and effectiveness in how the workflow happens. Those lean principles then become very important when we start considering how we might use agile practices to develop and deliver these offerings. We want to be able to use an agile approach to go about the process of actually building solutions and being able to create these service offerings. A big part of that is leveraging capabilities like a minimum viable product, being able to iteratively develop different parts of the solutions, different capabilities and enablers that will be required in order to deliver the solution, and then to create consistent feedback loops where the team can get quick feedback on the solution and how and whether it's meeting our goals. We might use this as part of a continuous delivery model, where we're using techniques like A/B testing or canary releases to be able to get frequent feedback early and to be able to identify opportunities to iterate the solution in a way that will better optimize the value that we deliver. Ultimately, what we're trying to produce is a user-centered solution, and leveraging techniques like design thinking, which you might study in the EIDL 4 High Velocity IT materials, is useful in helping to think about how the different aspects of the customer journey work, what the various design components look like, and how we might create a richer user experience. Eventually, we might use a technique like service blueprinting to be able to start to try to get a sense of how the service interaction might work. So if you look at the model that's described on the screen here, it starts at the top with the physical interactions that you might have as a customer working with other stakeholders, for example, to go to a ball game. And with that customer then has various interactions with us as a service provider who, say, is selling tickets to that game. And so we want to be able to describe the interactions and how they get the tickets, how they actually pick them up, how they actually pay for parking, and so forth as they're working their way through their experience. And in certain circumstances, they're having direct interactions with our stakeholders, and in other circumstances, they may be having interactions with back office capabilities. So you'll notice in the middle that we have these ideas of a line of interaction. What are the nature of the customer interactions with us as a service provider? And then what we call the line of visibility. Which of these things are visible to the customer, and which of these things happen in what we might think of as a backstage way, where we have various resources working behind the scenes, providing underpinning support for the on-stage resources who are doing direct customer interactions. Along the bottom, you have various underpinning support processes that are needed to be able to fulfill different aspects of this. And many of those might be fully automated, from a website where I can do ticket ordering to an application I might use to get a map to the ballpark and so forth. And so part of what we want to be able to think about is to look at what are all the different aspects of this service and how would we effectively manage the various stages, right? What does the customer interaction look like? What do the back office activities look like? What applications, systems, information is flowing through that workflow? And ultimately, how do we get the customer through their overall experience and to create a positive experience for them, and obviously to be able to manage our resources as well. So now that you've created some service blueprints, we can actually go through the process of describing how we might sell the service to a customer and how they might procure it from us. From a sales perspective, at some point we have to deal with pricing. What is the pricing model that we're going to use? If we're an internal service provider, this may just be a cost recovery model. And so we may be charging whatever the costs directly are to provision that service. If we're working for an external service provider, or we're working in an internal model where we're going to be competing against external service providers, some organizations may prefer us to use a similar to a private sector type pricing model. These can include cost plus, where we're adding a certain margin to the cost of the solution, what we think of generally as market price, or whatever the going rate is in the market for a particular type of solution, or perhaps some type of fixed price deliverable, which ultimately puts the onus on us to manage our costs and to a certain extent may constrain the ability of the customer to be able to get new capabilities as they want to go and evolve the service over time. Lastly, we may consider various types of differential charging where we have different price points depending upon demand models, depending upon various other things that may affect utilization and metering of a service, so that the service may have a core fixed price component and maybe a differential component based on usage patterns. From an internal sales perspective, we're generally going to leverage tools like service catalogs or probably our service desk to facilitate self-service for standard service and to be able to coordinate customer information around potential new services that they're looking for us to potentially introduce. If we're working as an external service provider, we may be put through some type of a bid process where we go through stages of requests for information, where the customer is doing initial information gathering, considering potential solution alternatives, requests for quotation where they're trying to assess the relative price points from different vendors based on their approach, and then a potential request for proposal where they're looking for that pricing along with a specific proposed solution, maybe for their final offer for certain subsets of the vendors who've made the cut on the previous levels. And so you think about all of this taken together. We want to be able to produce meaningful offers to customers, but this means we need to understand a lot about the customer and the value proposition from their perspective. And it also means we need to understand a lot about ourselves and our real costs in provisioning and delivering various capabilities so that we can effectively offer services in a way that's cost justifiable and ultimately that's going to be competitive to delivering the value proposition for the customer.
Thank you for joining us today. Deep Creek Center provides consulting and training for businesses around the world. For more information, visit deepcreekcenter.com.